Hello friends, welcome back. I know it's been a while since I've been on YouTube, but I do a lot of my little short tutorials over on TikTok and Instagram, so if you're not already a member following us on those, check the description down below and go check us out. Today I have a tutorial for you guys on how I did my vertical beach tumbler. So this one is super cute. It's got these different layers of waves, and look at those cells that came out in the resin. And then the fun part is these bubbles I did in the foam kind of as it's crashing up on the sand there. And I got that idea from Kara Ivy Art. If you go follow her page, she does that on her art pieces and such. So definitely super fun to do on a tumbler. I kind of wanted this to look like one of our charcuterie boards that we create. And all of the glitter used on here is from PDB glitter and Counterculture's resin and their white pigment paste. And you can find all of those along with discount codes down below in the description. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm using a 30-ounce skinny tumbler that's been sanded and washed and ready for my base coats, and I'm using Pop of Color chalk paints. You can find these on their website, Pop of Color, or on Counterculture's website. Both of those are linked down below in the description with a discount code. And the colors I'm using here are Ocean Deep, and then light turquoise and wet sand. So Ocean Deep's gonna be the largest portion, and I'm just gonna get that on. And then I'm going to use a little bit of that light turquoise on both sides of it. And then the wet sand is going to be that sandy beach portion, and that's just gonna be about a third of the tumbler right on the other side. And the brushes that I like to use for this are just really soft bristled makeup brushes. This one is the Wet n Wild brush, and you can find these at Dollar Tree. The brush I'm using for the light turquoise is also just a different kind of makeup brush found from the Dollar Tree. And then the purple brush is a Crystal-Lock brush, and it's very thick and fluffy and works great for this. And as you can see, the Pop of Color paints blend very well and smoothly and make a great ombre. And while the paints are still wet, I'm actually going to go in and apply my glitter directly to the wet paint, and that's what's going to adhere it. So first, I am using Juliette from PDB Creative Studio. This is a beautiful golden color with some light opals in it that really reflect the light. And I'm going to sprinkle that on that third of that wet sand paint and kind of let it fall down the sides so you get kind of that ombre effect. And then I'm going to go in with Sandbar, and this is a nice soft teal color, kind of blends in with that paint right below it. And I'm going to overlap that gold a little bit so it blends in, and then again, don't forget the bottom, and let it fall down a little bit onto that darker blue color for the next one that I'm going to go in with, which is Skinny Dip, also from PDB. And you can find the link down below, again with another discount code for those as well. After you get all the glitter applied, you're just going to want to let it sit and dry for about an hour or so. And then I use a spray sealer to make sure all the glitter stays in place, and I do that 1 or 2 times. And then I'm going to go in with Quick Coat from Counterculture DIY and use that to really seal in my glitter, keep it where I want it to be, and help prevent any bubbles when I apply epoxy. After the Quick Coat dries, I do have 2 coats of epoxy on this tumbler, and it is sanded so that it's smooth. And then I'm going to go on to this layer where this is going to be the first set of waves. So I'm just going to apply a coat of epoxy over the entire tumbler and make sure that that is all smoothed out. And then I am going to use my white pigment that you can also find from Counterculture and use that to kind of make the waves. So I mix the pigment paste directly into a little bit of epoxy, and I just kind of stop my turner so that you can see I outline where I want those waves to be. And it's kind of right along the edge of that light teal color to the sand color. And I don't care about being too messy or anything here because I'm going to use my heat gun with a little bit of a pointed nozzle attached to it so that I can pinpoint where I want those waves to go and kind of really spread them out nicely. And I'm going to blow them both in opposite directions. So I'm going to blow them down towards the center of that darker blue color. As you blow the waves out, just remember that the more you heat the epoxy up, the more it's going to move, and I really don't want these to move a whole lot. So I kind of hit them quick and then let it spin and do its thing. And I did use a torch after this just to kind of pop any remaining bubbles and help those cells come out. I then go back in with my white pigment paste and just kind of outline the edge of the waves to make it a little bit more distinct where they are hitting and crashing up on the sand right there. I'm then going to let that first layer of resin dry overnight before I go on to my second wave. So on the next day, I am mixing up a little bit more of that white pigment paste, and then I'm going to mix up a little bit of blue, and I use golden acrylic paints, and I believe the color I used was manganese blue, and I only used like 1 drop. And I kind of put it on a piece of paper and then used my popsicle stick to pick up some of the paint so that this was a real transparent color, and I did not want it to be too opaque. So I'm kind of testing it out and seeing what color I like the best. And then this I am not going to put over the entire tumbler. I'm actually going to outline exactly where I want this to go. So I'm going to look at that second wave and I'm going to do it just below the first wave. I don't want it to overlap completely. And I just use my finger to kind of outline it on both sides. And then I'm going to completely rub it in down the middle of all that blue. And what this is going to do is kind of cover up that first layer of white waves and make them look like they are underneath the water a little bit more and give it some more dimension and just a lot of fun to it. So I do this with my charcuterie boards, and I really wanted to see how this would look on a tumbler. And on the second set of waves, you'll see this turned out so gorgeous. So after I get the blue all applied, I did not put any on the bottom. I'm going to put it on my turner and let it spin for a little bit and give it a quick torch to pop any bubbles. Then I'm going to stop the turner and put on that white pigment paste right along the edge of the blue there. I do wipe it off of the sand part in the middle since there's no epoxy there and I don't want it kind of getting out of place. And I'm going to do that across both sides. And then I'm going to go in with my heat gun again with that pointed nozzle tip on it. And you can find that in my Amazon store, and I'll have that link down below as well. And again, I'm going to blow these in opposite directions down towards the middle of the blue. And it's really going to put a pure white color of waves over top of that first layer. So you'll see that dimension coming out and kind of look like the second layer of waves crashing in onto the sand. And then after I use this heat gun, again, you don't want to overheat it and have that epoxy move too much. I go in with my little kitchen torch, which is just a really pinpointed heat source, and go over top of that white pigment. And this helps activate the cells. And with this pigment paste and the artist epoxy from Counterculture, really helps those cells to come out. And I had a couple of little bubbles in the middle that had popped up from the first layer, so I just kind of went in and filled those in to make sure that you couldn't see anything. And then again, I'm going to stop the turner and go in with that white paste just to kind of define those waves again. I let everything dry for about 8 to 12 hours, and then I'm going to go in and make some fun foamy bubbles like they are crashing up on the sand. I am using my white Arteza paint pen, and I'm just going to go in and outline the waves on both sides of the tumbler. And I do this just like I did with the pigment paste. I kind of just really wanted those to be defined, and this is going to be the edge of where my bubbles are going to be. For this next step, I'm going to be using the UV resin from Counterculture, and I'm just going to put some in a little silicone mixing bowl here, and I've got a little stir stick that I put some white pigment on to make it a little bit more opaque, a little white, and you could use anything like the Armor Art in white. And then I'm going to work in smaller sections. So first I'm just going to use this little stick to kind of spread it along half of this wave here, and just kind of get it where I want it to be. I'm going to put more up front and then try to kind of fan it out a little bit into the bluer part of the waves. And you could use a popsicle stick or any stick really that you had on hand. And then I've got a little cup of Dawn dish soap and water. And I saw this method from Kara Ivy Art, and I'll tag her down below. And I'm just going to shake it up real good to get lots of those foamy bubbles, and then spread them out on top of that white UV, that UV resin. And then I'm going to use my lamp here to help set that. And once it is set up, I'm going to use a rag to kind of wipe it off. Paper towels weren't the best just because it catches on those ridges and kind of tears, but I have a wet rag and a dry rag, and just kind of clean that up and make sure that it is nice and dry and cure. And then I'm going to go on to the next section and just kind of work my way down. And I also went in and did this on that smaller wave in front, and I just did a much thinner line as it was kind of an older wave, so it's going to be receding, so it's not going to be quite as foamy. After all of these bubbles were on and cured, I did run to the sink and use my sander and just kind of knock down any tall ridges. I didn't want anything sharp and pointy sticking up, and I really wanted this to be fully covered with epoxy. So after I get both sets of waves down on both sides of that sand, I'm going to make sure everything is set up and cured and really hard, and then I'm going to go in with a mica powder. And I'm going to be using the Blue Starlight from PDB Creative Studio, and this is really kind of a clear color that shows off a blue hint of sparkle, almost like a really fine glitter. And I'm just going to take a dry paintbrush and I'm going to dab it in to all of those little bubble grooves. So the bubbles and just that foamy section that we just did the UV resin with. And I'll kind of brush it on, but I really want to make sure it gets down into those little bubbles and grooves, because as we put epoxy over the top of this, I want to make sure that these just still stand out really well. And I'll kind of show you this close up so you can really see how this just kind of adds a lot of dimension to it. And you can see all those tiny little bubbles that you really want to work on getting that paintbrush down inside of there. So it does take a little bit of time just to make sure you get everything covered and you get all those spaces filled in, but it is really worth it in the end. After the mica, I'm just going to kind of brush off that sand and gold area and make sure that there's no mica powder residue on it. You could use a piece of tape or paintbrush or anything, but I'm going to put a decal there, so I want to make sure it's nice and clean. And I am using one that just says Sun-Kissed. This is one of my own personal SVG files that you can find in my Etsy shop, which is linked down below. And I didn't have my transfer paper with me, so I'm using a piece of painter's tape, a green frog tape, and I'm just putting it over half of the decal, and then I'm going to pull that back off and just line it up. And I am using the Tech Wrap metallic gold vinyl, which is an awesome vinyl. I love the Tech Wrap brand. And then the inner portion, the sun-kissed portion, I painted on my Procreate, and so I needed to print that on the printable vinyl. And the printable vinyl you can't really use transfer paper on, so one by one I'm just going to kind of lift them up with my X-Acto knife or a tweezers to place them on. And I can do that with a few of the letters, and then some of the letters are it's like semi-cursive font and connected, so when you pull those up you just have to be very careful that you don't rip any of your printable vinyl. And I just started on one end and with that E and laid it down, and then worked my way down the letters. Once my decal is on, I'm going to seal everything in with the Quick Coat from Counterculture DIY, and then go in with my epoxy. I do one coat, and then I did a good sanding just to make sure everything was nice and smooth, and then finished it off with one final coat of the artist resin from Counterculture, and this is how it turned out. Let me know what you think.